The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Hawthorne and Couture, Manhattan's most exclusive dining establishment, as Julian Hawthorne stood in the shadows of the private dining room, watching his mother sit alone at table 7. Dorothy Hawthorne, elegant even in her silence, studied the menu with fingers that trembled slightly, a glass of untouched champagne reflecting the ambient lighting like liquid gold. It had been 8 months since his father's funeral, 8 months since Dorothy had last set foot in any of the family's restaurants. 8 months of Julian carrying a guilt so heavy it had carved permanent lines around his eyes that no amount of success could erase. Mr. Hawthorne, Marcus Chen, his general manager, appeared at his elbow, tablet in hand. The new hostess starts her shift in 5 minutes. Should I have her shadow Vanessa tonight or throw her straight into service? Julian barely heard him. His attention was fixed on his mother, who had just glanced toward the kitchen doors with an expression he knew too well. The look of someone preparing to leave, to retreat back into the fortress of loneliness she'd built around herself. He'd convinced her to come tonight by promising the private room would be empty, that she wouldn't have to navigate the awkward interactions with staff who didn't know how to communicate with her, who smiled too broadly and spoke too slowly, as if deafness meant she couldn't understand their condescension. "Whatever you think best, Marcus," Julian muttered, his jaw tight. He should have learned ASL fluently years ago. His father had been fluent. His father had built this empire specifically to create spaces where Dorothy would always feel welcome, understood, celebrated. And what had Julian done? Taken basic signing classes that left him capable of little more than elementary greetings and apologies. The kitchen doors swung open, and Marcus straightened. "That's her now, Lily Patterson." Julian's gaze shifted to the young woman emerging from the back corridor, and something in his chest constricted. She looked entirely out of place. Not in a negative sense, but in a way that made the restaurant's carefully curated luxury seem almost garish by comparison. She was perhaps 24, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing the standard Hawthorne hostess uniform that somehow looked both too formal and too casual on her frame. Her shoes, he noticed, were polished but worn at the heels. She carried herself with a particular kind of careful confidence he'd seen before in people who'd learned early that the world wouldn't make space for them. They'd have to carve it out themselves. Vanessa, his head hostess, was gesturing toward the podium, explaining the reservation system with the rapid-fire efficiency of someone who'd given this orientation 100 times. But Lily's attention had drifted. She was looking past Vanessa, through the archway into the main dining room, and her expression had shifted into something Julian couldn't quite name. Then she moved. Not toward the podium, not toward Vanessa. She walked directly toward table 7, where Dorothy was now gathering her purse, preparing to signal for the check before she'd even ordered. Julian felt his muscles tense, an instinctive protective response rising in his throat. If this new hostess made his mother uncomfortable, made her feel more isolated, but Lily wasn't speaking. Her hands were moving. Julian's breath caught as he watched Lily's fingers form shapes, fluid and confident, the universal poetry of American Sign Language flowing from her with an ease that seemed impossible for someone her age working in a restaurant where ASL was never required, never even requested. And she was signing something to his mother, and Dorothy's face, God, his mother's face, transformed in a way Julian hadn't seen since the funeral. Dorothy's hands flew up in response, signing rapidly, and Lily laughed, actually laughed, a sound that seemed too genuine for the artificial elegance of the dining room. The two women were conversing, really conversing, with an enthusiasm that made the space around them feel suddenly too small for the magnitude of what was happening. "What the hell?" Marcus breathed beside him. "Did you know she could—" "No." Julian's voice came out rougher than intended. Her application didn't mention any special skills. "Should I interrupt? Vanessa looks like she's about to have a stroke." Julian could see Vanessa hovering nearby, clearly torn between professional protocol and the bizarre sight of a first-night hostess abandoning her training to chat with a guest. But he raised a hand, stopping Marcus. "Leave them." He couldn't stop watching. His mother was smiling now, genuinely smiling, her hands moving with an animation he'd almost forgotten she possessed. Lily had pulled out the chair across from Dorothy and sat down, a complete breach of service etiquette that somehow felt entirely right. She was showing Dorothy something on her phone, and his mother was nodding, signing something that made Lily's expression soften into sympathy. The conversation lasted perhaps 7 minutes, though it felt like both an eternity and an instant. When Lily finally stood, she signed something else, and Dorothy reached out to squeeze her hand, a gesture of connection that made Julian's throat tight. Then Lily returned to the hostess stand, where Vanessa was waiting with barely concealed irritation. Julian didn't think. He moved. "Mr. Hawthorne." Vanessa straightened immediately as he approached. "I apologize for the confusion. I was just explaining to Lily that we have protocols." "It's fine, Vanessa." Julian's eyes were on Lily, who met his gaze with a directness that surprised him. Up close, he could see the exhaustion around her eyes, the kind that came from long-term stress rather than a single sleepless night. But there was steel there too, a refusal to be diminished. "Miss Patterson, I'm Julian Hawthorne. I own this restaurant. I know who you are, Mr. Hawthorne." Her voice was steady, professional, with the faintest trace of a Brooklyn accent she'd probably worked hard to minimize. "I apologize if I overstepped. I saw that the woman at table 7 was preparing to leave, and I thought, that woman is my mother." Julian watched her face carefully, saw the flicker of understanding cross her features. "How do you know ASL?" Something shifted in her expression, a wall going up even as she maintained eye contact. "I learned it for personal reasons." "Personal reasons," Julian repeated. It was a deflection, polite but firm. He should respect that boundary. He should let it go and simply be grateful that someone on his staff could communicate with Dorothy. But there was something about the way Lily had moved toward his mother, the naturalness of that connection, that made him need to understand. "Miss Patterson, my mother hasn't smiled like that in 8 months. So I'm going to ask you again, and I'd appreciate an honest answer. How do you know sign language?" The restaurant hummed around them, the clink of silverware, the murmur of conversation, the soft jazz filtering through hidden speakers. Lily's jaw tightened, and for a moment Julian thought she might refuse to answer. Then she spoke, her voice lower, meant only for him. "I have a 6-year-old sister, Grace. She's deaf. After our parents died 3 years ago, I became her guardian. I learned ASL because I had to, because she deserved to have at least one person in the world who could talk to her without barriers." She paused, and something fierce flashed in her eyes. "I saw your mother sitting alone, looking like she wanted to disappear, and I recognized that look. It's the same look Grace gets when we're in public and people stare at her like she's broken. So yes, I overstepped. I broke protocol, but I won't apologize for making her feel seen." The words landed like a physical blow, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. Julian had spent 8 months trying to coax his mother out of isolation with money, with gentle persuasion, with guilt-tinged phone calls. This young woman had accomplished more in 7 minutes than he had in nearly a year, simply by offering the one thing he'd never been able to give: effortless communication. "Your mother asked me to tell you something," Lily continued, and her voice softened slightly. "She said to stop hovering in the shadows like a guilty ghost. She can see you from where she's sitting, and she wants you to join her for dinner." Julian's chest tightened. Of course Dorothy had seen him. She always did. And what else did she say? Because he could tell from Lily's expression that there was more. "She said that if you fire me for talking to her, she'll never speak to you again." A hint of a smile played at the corner of Lily's mouth. "Technically, she signed never sign to you again, but I thought I'd translate for maximum impact." Despite everything, Julian felt a laugh escape him, rough and unexpected. "My mother has always had a gift for emotional blackmail." "It's a maternal superpower," Lily agreed. And for just a moment, the professional distance between them dissolved into something almost human, almost warm. Then Vanessa cleared her throat pointedly, and the moment shattered. Julian straightened, remembering where he was, who he was, the owner, the boss, the man who'd built his father's legacy into something even larger, even more untouchable. "Marcus," he called, and his general manager materialized instantly. "Miss Patterson will be joining my mother and me for dinner. Have the kitchen prepare 3 of tonight's special." "Mr. Hawthorne, I'm supposed to be working," Lily started, but he cut her off with a gesture. "Consider it a working dinner. My mother clearly has things she wants to discuss, and I suspect she'll want you there to facilitate." He paused, then added more quietly, "Please." Lily studied him for a long moment, and Julian had the unsettling sensation of being evaluated and found somehow wanting. Then she nodded, a small, careful gesture. "All right, but only if you promise not to make this weird." "I promise to try," Julian said, which was the most honest answer he could give. As they walked toward table 7 together, Julian caught his reflection in one of the restaurant's many mirrors, a 35-year-old man in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, about to have dinner with his mother and a hostess who'd been employed for less than an hour. The absurdity of it should have bothered him. Instead, for the first time in 8 months, he felt something that might have been hope. Dorothy looked up as they approached, and her hands moved in a quick, fluid question directed at Julian. He caught maybe half of it, enough to understand she was asking why he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Lily translated without being asked, her voice soft. She wants to know if you're okay. Julian met his mother's eyes and signed the one phrase he knew he could execute perfectly, the phrase his father had taught him when he was 5 years old. I love you. Dorothy's expression softened, and she signed back, I love you too. Now sit down and let me talk to this remarkable young woman about something other than your guilty conscience. Lily's lips twitched as she translated, and Julian found himself sitting down at table 7 in his own restaurant, about to have the most important conversation of his life with 2 women who spoke a language he barely understood. And somehow, impossibly, that felt exactly right. The Chilean sea bass arrived at table 7 with the kind of theatrical presentation that Hawthorne and Camus had perfected over 15 years. Microgreens arranged like abstract art, sauce dots forming a constellation across bone-white porcelain, steam rising in delicate wisps that caught the candlelight. Julian watched his mother's face as the server placed the dish before her, searching for that spark of appreciation she used to show when his father would debut a new menu item. But Dorothy's attention wasn't on the food. Her hands were moving again, flying through signs with an urgency that made Julian's stomach tighten. Lily, seated to Dorothy's right in a position that should have felt awkward but somehow didn't, nodded seriously as she translated. She says the plating is beautiful, but she wants to know if you remember the first dish your father ever made for her. Lily's voice carried a careful neutrality, but her eyes flicked to Julian with something that might have been sympathy. She says it was scrambled eggs in their studio apartment in Queens, and he burned them so badly the smoke alarm went off at 2 in the morning. Julian felt his throat constrict. I remember the story. Dad used to say those were the best eggs he ever made because Mom laughed so hard she cried. Dorothy's expression softened, and she signed something else. Slower this time, more deliberate. Lily hesitated before translating, and Julian caught the moment of calculation in her eyes. She was deciding how honest to be. She says your father never needed Michelin stars to make her feel loved. He just needed to show up and try, even when he failed. Lily paused. She's asking if you understand what she means. The words landed like a punch to the solar plexus, perfectly aimed and devastatingly accurate. Julian set down his fork with more force than intended, the clink against porcelain too loud in the intimate space. I understand that I've failed her. Is that what you want me to say? Julian. Dorothy's hand reached across the table, but he was already pushing back his chair, the legs scraping against hardwood with a sound that made nearby diners glance over. Excuse me. He managed to keep his voice level, professional, even as something raw and broken clawed at his chest. I need to check on the kitchen. He was halfway to the kitchen doors when Lily's voice stopped him, quiet but carrying in that particular way that demanded attention without volume. Mr. Hawthorne, running away won't make you fluent in ASL. Julian turned slowly. Lily had stood up, leaving Dorothy at the table with an expression that somehow managed to convey both maternal exasperation and understanding. The younger woman crossed the dining room with steady purpose, seemingly oblivious to the fact that every server, every guest, every person in the space had suddenly become aware that something significant was unfolding. I'm not running away, Julian said, hearing the defensive edge in his own voice and hating it. I'm giving my mother space to enjoy her meal without the reminder that her son is incompetent. You're not incompetent. Lily stopped 3 feet away, close enough that he could see the exhaustion etched around her eyes again, the tightness in her jaw that spoke of too many nights worrying about things she couldn't control. You're guilty. There's a difference. You've known me for an hour. You don't know anything about what I am. You're right. I don't know you. She crossed her arms, a defensive gesture that somehow looked more protective than aggressive. But I know what it looks like when someone is drowning in something they can't fix. I see it in the mirror every morning. The honesty of it disarmed him, cutting through his anger and leaving something more vulnerable in its wake. Julian glanced toward table 7, where Dorothy was watching them with the patient expression of someone who had seen this particular scene play out in various forms throughout her son's life. What are you drowning in, Miss Patterson? He asked quietly. Lily's jaw tightened, and for a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, her voice low enough that only he could hear. Rent that's 3 months overdue. A sister who needs hearing aids we can't afford. A landlord who's threatening eviction in 2 weeks. Student loans from a degree I never finished because someone had to raise Grace. She paused, meeting his eyes with unflinching directness. So yes, Mr. Hawthorne, I know what drowning feels like. And I know that sometimes the only thing that keeps you swimming is remembering that someone needs you to survive. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of different kinds of poverty. His emotional, hers financial, both equally capable of destroying what mattered most. Your mother doesn't need you to be perfect at ASL, Lily continued, her voice softer now. She just needs you to try. To sit down at that table and communicate however you can, even if it's clumsy and broken and frustrating. Because the alternative, what you're doing right now, is telling her that your discomfort matters more than her isolation. Julian felt something crack open in his chest, painful and necessary. I don't know how to do that. Yes, you do. Lily gestured toward the table. You start by sitting down. Then you sign what you can and I'll help with the rest. And tomorrow you learn a few more signs. And the day after that a few more. Until eventually, you don't need me to translate. She paused. But tonight you just need to stay. The simplicity of it was almost offensive. Julian had built an empire on complexity, on elaborate solutions to intricate problems. The idea that healing 8 months of grief and guilt could start with something as mundane as sitting down for dinner felt impossible. And yet, he looked at his mother, really looked at her, and saw not the elegant matriarch of a restaurant dynasty but a 62-year-old woman who'd lost her husband and been slowly losing her son to guilt ever since. She was signing something to him across the dining room, and even with his limited knowledge he understood it. Come back. Julian took a breath and walked back to table 7. Dorothy's face transformed as he sat down. Relief and something fiercer, pride maybe, flooding her features. Her hands moved immediately, rapid and expressive, and Julian caught perhaps one word in 5. But Lily was there, her voice providing the bridge he desperately needed. She says she's sorry for being harsh. She knows you're trying. She knows you loved your father and that losing him broke something in you too. Lily's translation carried Dorothy's emotional cadence, somehow making the words feel like his mother's voice, even though they came from someone else's mouth. But she says she can't lose you both, so if you need to be clumsy and uncomfortable and frustrated to find your way back to her, then be clumsy. She'll wait. Julian's vision blurred, and he didn't bother to hide it. He signed slowly, carefully, forming the words he'd practiced 1,000 times, but never quite had the courage to express. I'm sorry. I miss him. I miss you. Dorothy's response was immediate, her hands gentle as she signed back. Lily translated quietly. She says, I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. Now eat your dinner before it gets cold and the chef has a breakdown. The absurdity of it, the profound and the mundane colliding at a table in Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, pulled a genuine laugh from Julian's throat. He picked up his fork, and Dorothy did the same, and for the first time in 8 months they ate together without the ghost of Richard Hawthorne sitting between them like an unbridgeable chasm. The dinner progressed in fits and starts, Julian's clumsy signing supplemented by Lily's fluid translation. They talked about everything and nothing. Dorothy's garden in the Hamptons, the new executive chef Julian had hired from Paris, a documentary about marine biology that Dorothy wanted to recommend, surface-level topics that somehow felt profound, simply because they were shared. It was nearly 10 o'clock when Marcus appeared at Julian's elbow, tablet in hand and expression carefully neutral. Mr. Hawthorne, I apologize for interrupting, but we have a situation at the door. Mrs. Vanessa Hartwick is here with a party of 8. She doesn't have a reservation and she's quite insistent. Julian suppressed a sigh. Vanessa Hartwick, no relation to his hostess Vanessa, was the wife of Senator Gregory Hartwick and a woman who considered quite insistent to be a baseline personality trait. She was also on the board of 3 charities Dorothy supported and had been a friend of his father's. Tell her I'll be right there, Julian said, already standing. He turned to his mother, signing 1 minute before glancing at Lily. Will you stay with her? Of course, Lily said simply. Julian made his way to the entrance, where Vanessa Hartwick stood in the foyer radiating the particular brand of entitled impatience that came from a lifetime of doors opening at her approach. She was 50-something, preserved by wealth and determination, dressed in Chanel and dripping with diamonds that caught the light like small, aggressive stars. Julian, darling. She air-kissed near his cheeks with practiced precision. I apologize for the lack of reservation, but Gregory just closed the most exhausting deal, and we simply must celebrate. You understand. What Julian understood was that Vanessa Hartwick had likely tried 3 other exclusive restaurants before coming here, been turned away from all of them, and was now testing whether friendship with his late father would override his strict reservation policy. "Mrs. Hartwick, I'm afraid we're completely booked tonight." "Oh, nonsense. There's always room for family friends." She was already moving past him toward the dining room, her entourage following like well-dressed pilot fish. "We'll take the corner table by the windows, the one Richard always saved for special occasions." That table was occupied by a tech CEO celebrating his company's IPO. But before Julian could explain this, Vanessa's gaze had swept across the dining room and landed on table 7, where Dorothy and Lily sat in animated conversation, their hands moving in synchronized rhythm. Vanessa's expression shifted, sharpening with predatory interest. "Is that Dorothy? With a server?" She turned back to Julian, lowering her voice to a stage whisper. "Julian, darling, I know grief makes people behave strangely, but surely you're not allowing staff to dine with your mother in public. What will people think?" Julian felt his jaw tighten, years of practiced diplomacy warring with a sudden, fierce protectiveness. "That server is Miss Patterson, one of my employees. She's dining with my mother at my invitation." "How progressive." Vanessa's tone suggested it was anything but a compliment, though I must say it does seem rather inappropriate, blurring those lines between staff and family. "Richard would have never—" "My father," Julian interrupted, his voice cold enough to freeze the champagne in Vanessa's glass, "would have done exactly what I'm doing. He built these restaurants to create spaces where everyone felt welcome, not to maintain the kind of arbitrary hierarchies you're suggesting." Vanessa blinked, clearly unused to being contradicted. "I see. Well, I suppose times are changing." Her gaze drifted back to Lily, calculating. "Tell me, Julian, does this young woman have a name I might recognize? Is she perhaps someone's daughter I should know?" The question landed exactly as intended, a probe to determine whether Lily had any social currency worth acknowledging. Julian felt something dark and angry coil in his chest. "Her name is Lily Patterson, and the only thing you need to know about her is that she's earned her place at that table." He gestured toward the door with barely concealed impatience. "Now, I'm afraid I can't accommodate your party tonight, but I'd be happy to reserve a table for next week." "That won't be necessary." Vanessa's smile had acquired a sharp edge. "I can see where your priorities lie. I do hope you know what you're doing, Julian, mixing business with charity has a tendency to complicate things." She swept out with her entourage, leaving a wake of expensive perfume and unspoken judgment. Julian stood in the foyer for a long moment, feeling the weight of a decision he hadn't consciously made, but somehow knew would alter everything that followed. When he returned to table 7, Dorothy's hands were already moving, asking what had happened. Before he could attempt to answer, Lily spoke quietly. "She wants to know if there's a problem." Julian looked at his mother, then at Lily, and made a choice that felt both reckless and inevitable. "No problem. Just the beginning of what I suspect will be a very interesting conversation." But as he sat back down, Julian couldn't shake the memory of Vanessa Hartwick's calculating gaze, or the certainty that tonight's dinner had just set events in motion that would test every assumption he'd made about loyalty, class, and what it meant to honor his father's legacy. 3 days after the dinner at table 7, Julian stood in his corner office on the 42nd floor of the Hawthorne Tower, staring at a spreadsheet that should have held his complete attention, but couldn't compete with the memory of his mother's laughter. Real laughter. The kind he hadn't heard since his father's funeral, echoing through the restaurant as Lily signed something that Dorothy found hilarious. Marcus had sent him the surveillance footage the next morning, not out of suspicion, but because he thought Julian might want to see the moment that had transformed the entire energy of the dining room. In the footage, you could see other guests noticing Dorothy's joy, see their expressions soften, see the rigid formality of Hawthorne & Co. give way to something more human. One woman had even approached their table to ask Lily where she'd learned ASL, because her grandson was deaf and she didn't know where to start. Lily had stayed 2 hours past the end of her shift, teaching that woman the signs for "I love you" and "I'm proud of you." She hadn't asked for overtime. She'd just stayed. A knock at the door pulled Julian from his thoughts. "Come in." Marcus entered, followed by Vanessa, his head hostess, not the senator's wife, both wearing expressions that suggested they'd drawn straws to determine who had to deliver bad news. Marcus had lost. "We have a problem," Marcus said without preamble. "Or rather, Lily Patterson has a problem, which means we have a problem." Julian's attention sharpened. What kind of problem? Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. She didn't come in for her shift this morning. When I called her emergency contact number, her landlord answered. Apparently, Lily gave his number because she doesn't have family besides her sister. She paused. The landlord said they were evicted yesterday. He found them sleeping in her car this morning in the parking lot behind the building. The words hit Julian like a physical blow. He remembered Lily's quiet confession at dinner. Rent that's 3 months overdue. A landlord who's threatening eviction in 2 weeks. Apparently, 2 weeks had become yesterday, and yesterday had become a 6-year-old deaf girl sleeping in a car in October in New York City. Where are they now? Julian's voice came out harder than intended. I don't know, Vanessa admitted. The landlord said Lily drove off when he tried to talk to her. She was crying, and the little girl was scared. He felt bad enough about the eviction that he wanted us to know, in case we could help. Julian was already reaching for his coat. Get me her address, the old one where she was evicted from. And call every shelter in Brooklyn that takes families. Someone might have seen her. Mr. Hawthorne, you have a meeting with the investors in 20 minutes. Reschedule it. He was halfway to the door when he stopped, turning back. Actually, don't reschedule, cancel it. Tell them something came up that takes priority. Marcus and Vanessa exchanged glances that Julian ignored. Let them think what they wanted. Let the investors be offended. There was a child sleeping in a car, and her sister, his employee, the woman who'd given his mother back her smile, was drowning in exactly the kind of desperation that made people disappear. The address Vanessa provided led Julian to a neighborhood in Brownsville, Brooklyn, where gentrification hadn't yet reached, and probably never would. The building was a 4-story walk-up with graffiti-tagged walls and windows covered in security bars that looked more symbolic than functional. A pile of belongings sat on the curb. A mattress, garbage bags stuffed with clothes, a small desk with one broken leg, and a cardboard box labeled Grace's Things in careful handwriting. Julian's chest tightened as he parked his Tesla across the street, immediately aware of how obscenely out of place the car looked in this neighborhood. A group of teenagers on the corner eyed it with the kind of calculating interest that suggested they were debating whether the hassle of stealing it was worth the inevitable police attention. He approached the building's entrance, where an older man in a maintenance uniform was dragging the mattress toward a dumpster. The landlord, Julian guessed. Excuse me, Julian called. I'm looking for Lily Patterson, I'm her employer. The man stopped, wiping sweat from his forehead with a greasy handkerchief. You're a little late for character references. Girl's gone, along with her kid sister. He gestured toward the pile of belongings. Told her she had till noon to clear out. She was gone by 8. Where did she go? How the hell should I know? I'm not her keeper. But something in the man's expression suggested he felt worse about the situation than he was willing to admit. Look, I gave her more chances than I should have. 3 months of no rent. My mortgage company breathing down my neck, my wife telling me I'm too soft. What was I supposed to do? Julian studied the man, recognizing the particular exhaustion of someone caught between their conscience and their circumstances. Did she say anything before she left? Anything about where she might go? The landlord hesitated, then sighed. She said something about a library, that the kid liked libraries because they're warm and quiet, and nobody bothers you if you're reading. PS 284 on Van Siclen Avenue has a library that stays open till 6. He paused. The girl, Grace, she's a good kid. Real polite even though she can't hear. And Lily, she tried. Worked 2 jobs before she got hired at your fancy restaurant, just wasn't enough. The words landed with the weight of systemic failure, the kind that no amount of individual effort could overcome. Julian nodded slowly. Thank you. He found them at PS 284, exactly where the landlord had suggested. The school library was a small fluorescent-lit space with cheerful posters about reading and faded carpet that smelled like old books and cafeteria food. Lily sat at a child-sized table in the corner, her arm around a little girl with auburn hair identical to hers, Grace obviously, who was reading a picture book about elephants with the intense concentration of a child using stories to escape reality. Lily looked up as Julian approached, and the expression that crossed her face was something between humiliation and defiance, as if she was daring him to pity her while simultaneously preparing to defend herself against it. Mr. Hawthorne, she said quietly, her free hand moving to sign something to Grace, who glanced at Julian with wide, wary eyes before returning to her book. I'm sorry about missing my shift. I'll understand if you need to fire me. Julian pulled out one of the tiny chairs and sat down, his knees nearly hitting his chest in the process. The absurdity of a billionaire folding himself into elementary school furniture should have been comical, but nothing about this moment was funny. I'm not here to fire you, he said. I'm here to offer you a job. Lily's expression flickered with confusion. I already have a job, or I did until I... Not as a hostess. Julian leaned forward, keeping his voice low so only she could hear. I want to hire you as Hawthorne & Co.'s Director of Accessibility. You'd be responsible for training all our staff in ASL, implementing accessibility protocols across all 15 of our restaurants, and consulting on design modifications to make our spaces more welcoming for deaf and hard-of-hearing guests. He paused. The position comes with a salary of $120,000 annually, full benefits and a signing bonus sufficient to cover first, last, and deposit on a new apartment. Lily stared at him like he'd started speaking a language she didn't understand. That's not a real position. It is now. Julian had made the decision somewhere between his office and this library, a certainty crystallizing that felt both impulsive and absolutely right. My father built Hawthorne & Co. on the principle that luxury should be accessible to everyone, not just the able-bodied elite. We've failed at that mission. You can help us do better. Mr. Hawthorne, Julian. I appreciate the offer, but I can't accept charity disguised as employment. Lily's voice was steady, but he could see her hands trembling slightly. I won't be your project, your way of assuaging guilt about your mother, or about the fact that I'm currently homeless. This isn't charity, Julian said, and he was surprised to find he meant it. This is business. Do you know how many potential customers we lose because they feel unwelcome in our spaces? How many families don't celebrate at Hawthorne restaurants because they know their deaf grandmother or hard-of-hearing father will spend the entire meal isolated and frustrated? He pulled out his phone, calling up the research he'd spent the previous night compiling. Approximately 15% of American adults report some degree of hearing loss. That's 48 million people we're currently failing to serve adequately. He turned the phone toward her, showing graphs and statistics he'd gathered from disability advocacy organizations, demographic data, competitor analyses from restaurants that had implemented robust accessibility programs. Lily scanned the information with the sharp attention of someone who'd learned early that details mattered. Even if everything you're saying is true, she said slowly, why me? I have no formal training. I learned ASL from YouTube videos and online courses. I never finished my degree. I have no qualifications beyond the fact that I can sign, and you saw me make your mother laugh. You have the only qualification that matters. You understand what it feels like to be isolated, and you refuse to let anyone else experience that if you can help it. Julian met her eyes directly. I saw you teach that woman at the restaurant how to sign to her grandson. You stayed 2 hours past your shift on your first night to give a stranger the tools to connect with her family. That's not something you can teach in a business program. That's character. Grace tugged on Lily's sleeve, signing something that made Lily's expression soften into something painfully tender. She signed back, then looked at Julian with eyes that were too bright. She wants to know if you're the nice man from my work, Lily translated, her voice barely above a whisper. She says I told her someone at my new job made me smile for the first time in a long time. Julian felt something crack in his chest. He turned to Grace, moving his hands slowly, carefully forming the signs he'd been practicing every night since the dinner at table 7. Hello, my name is Julian. It's nice to meet you. Grace's face lit up with surprise and delight, and she signed back something rapid and enthusiastic. Lily let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She says your signing is terrible, but she appreciates the effort, Lily translated, wiping at her eyes. And she wants to know if your job comes with an apartment that allows goldfish, because she's always wanted a goldfish. Julian felt his own eyes burning. It comes with whatever kind of apartment you want. Within reason. Lily was quiet for a long moment, her hand absently stroking Grace's hair while the little girl returned to her elephant book. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotions she was clearly fighting to control. If I say yes, people are going to think I manipulated you. They're going to say I used your mother's loneliness and my sister's disability to exploit your guilt. She paused. That woman at the restaurant, Mrs. Hartwick, she already thinks I'm some kind of opportunist. This will only confirm it. Let them think what they want, Julian said, surprised by the vehemence in his own voice. The people whose opinions matter will understand, and the people whose opinions don't matter are going to find something to criticize regardless of what you do. And your mother? What does she think? Julian pulled out his phone again, calling up the text Dorothy had sent him that morning after he'd explained the situation. He handed it to Lily, who read the message with an expression that shifted from surprise to something that looked like wonder. The text was simple. If you don't hire that girl, I'll disown you and leave everything to the cat shelter. She's brilliant, she's kind, and she needs help that we can provide. Your father would have already given her the job and a raise. Stop overthinking and do the right thing. Love, Mom. P.S. Tell Grace I want to take her to the aquarium next weekend to look at fish. Lily handed the phone back, blinking rapidly. Your mother texts? She uses voice to text most of the time, Julian explained. But yes, she's very insistent when she wants to be. Grace tugged Lily's sleeve again, signing a question. Lily signed back. A conversation in a language Julian couldn't fully follow but could understand in the way her shoulders slowly relaxed. The way Grace's expression shifted from worry to cautious hope. Finally, Lily looked at him directly, her jaw set with the determination of someone who'd decided to bet everything on a single roll of dice. 120,000. Full benefits. Signing bonus for the apartment. And if it doesn't work out, if I fail at this, you let me resign with dignity rather than firing me publicly. You won't fail, Julian said. You don't know that. No, he admitted. But I'm willing to bet a six-figure salary that I'm right. Lily's lips twitched into something that might have been a smile if it hadn't been weighted with so much exhaustion and relief. When do I start? Tomorrow, Julian said. Today you and Grace are going to let me take you apartment hunting. We'll find somewhere close to a good school for Grace, preferably near one of our restaurant locations so your commute isn't hell. He paused. Unless you have other plans for the day? Lily glanced around the elementary school library, at the pile of bags in the corner that contained everything she and her sister owned, at Grace's worn shoes and her own hands that still trembled slightly with the adrenaline of crisis. Then she let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a cry. No other plans, she said. We're completely free. As they left the library, Grace holding Lily's hand and watching Julian with the cautious interest of a child who'd learned not to trust adults too quickly, Julian felt the weight of a decision that couldn't be undone. He'd just hired someone with no formal qualifications for a six-figure position, based on little more than instinct and his mother's approval. It was either the best decision he'd ever made or the worst. But as Grace signed something that made Lily laugh, a real laugh that echoed in the school hallway like the promise of better things, Julian found he didn't care which it turned out to be. Some bets were worth taking, even when you couldn't calculate the odds. The article appeared in Manhattan Social Review exactly 1 week after Lily signed her employment contract. Julian saw it first thing Monday morning, forwarded to him by his PR director with a subject line that read simply, "We have a situation. Hawthorne airs questionable hiring practices. Charity or something else." The byline belonged to Clarissa Pemberton, a society columnist who'd made a career out of dismantling reputations with surgically precise prose. Julian scanned the article with growing fury, each sentence calibrated to inflict maximum damage while maintaining plausible deniability. Sources close to the Hawthorne family report that Julian Hawthorne, 35, recently created a six-figure position for a former hostess with no relevant qualifications beyond a chance encounter with his recently widowed mother. Miss Lily Patterson, 24, of Brooklyn, was allegedly homeless at the time of her promotion to Director of Accessibility, a title that insiders suggest may be more about personal charity than business necessity. While Mr. Hawthorne's generosity might seem admirable on the surface, questions arise about the appropriateness of such dramatic preferential treatment, particularly given Miss Patterson's youth and the convenient timing of her promotion. One restaurant investor, speaking on condition of anonymity, expressed concern that Hawthorne may be allowing emotional decisions to override sound business judgment. "We've all watched Julian struggle since his father's passing," the source noted. Richard Hawthorne built this empire on impeccable standards. Hiring unqualified staff for executive positions out of sentiment isn't honoring his legacy, it's undermining it. Miss Patterson, who reportedly cares for a disabled younger sister, was not available for comment. Representatives from Hawthorne and Cumber declined to elaborate on the specific qualifications that warranted such an unusual promotion. Julian threw his phone onto the desk with enough force that the screen cracked. Through his office windows, Manhattan stretched out in steel and glass indifference, 42 floors of distance from the real world where women like Lily fought every day just to survive, only to have their competence questioned by people who'd never struggled for anything. His phone buzzed. A text from Dorothy. "Have you seen the article? Call me." Before he could respond, Marcus knocked and entered without waiting for permission, holding a tablet like it might explode. "We're getting calls. Investors, board members, that restaurant association we're part of. Everyone wants to know if the article is true." "What part?" Julian's voice came out colder than intended. The part where I hired someone talented for a position we desperately needed to fill? Or the part where Clarissa Pemberton implies I'm either criminally stupid or engaging in something inappropriate with an employee? Marcus winced. The latter is generating the most interest, unfortunately. Vanessa Hartwick called 3 times this morning. She's demanding an emergency board meeting. Of course she was. Julian should have anticipated this. Vanessa Hartwick didn't accept embarrassment gracefully, and being turned away from the restaurant while Lily dined with Dorothy had clearly festered into something toxic. The article had her fingerprints all over it. The anonymous source, the timing, the carefully worded insinuations that stopped just short of actionable slander. "Schedule the meeting," Julian said flatly. "This afternoon. I want every board member there." "Julian, maybe you should consult with PR first, prepare a statement." "No statements. No damage control. Just the meeting." He grabbed his coat. "I need to talk to Lily before this gets worse." He found her on the 2nd floor of their flagship restaurant, in what used to be a storage room, and was now being converted into a training space. She was teaching 3 servers, Carmen, David, and young Tommy, who couldn't be more than 19, basic ASL, her hands moving with patient precision as she demonstrated the sign for allergies. The servers mimicked her movements with varying degrees of success, but all 3 wore expressions of focused concentration. Lily noticed Julian in the doorway and held up one finger. "Wait," before finishing the lesson. "Remember, the context matters as much as the sign itself. If someone signs allergic while pointing at the menu, they're not just sharing information, they're trusting you with their safety. That responsibility should show in how you respond." The servers nodded seriously, and Julian felt something tighten in his chest. This was what he'd hired her for. Not just the technical skill, but the understanding that accessibility was about dignity as much as accommodation. "Take 15, Lily told the group, then crossed to Julian with an expression that suggested she already knew why he was there. "I saw the article. Grace's school secretary showed it to me when I dropped her off this morning. She thought I should know what people were saying." "I'm sorry," Julian said, and meant it. "This is my fault. I should have anticipated the backlash. It's not your fault that people are assholes." Lily's bluntness surprised him into silence. She gestured toward the training room, where Carmen was practicing signs with David. "You know what happened after that article posted? I got 17 emails this morning from parents of deaf kids thanking me for taking this position. 17 families who've been trying to find restaurants where their children could communicate comfortably, where they wouldn't spend the entire meal feeling isolated." Her voice roughened slightly. "So Clarissa Pemberton can write whatever she wants. I know what I'm doing here matters." Julian studied her, this young woman who'd gone from homeless to executive in a week, and somehow maintained more composure than he felt. "The board is calling an emergency meeting this afternoon. Vanessa Hartwick is leading the charge. They're going to question your qualifications, your salary, possibly the entire position. So let them question." Lily's jaw set with familiar determination. "I'll show them the accessibility audit I completed over the weekend. I'll present the implementation plan for ASL training across all 15 locations. I'll explain exactly how we're going to capture that 15% market share you mentioned, complete with projected revenue increases." She paused. "Unless you're planning to fire me before I get the chance." "Fire you?" Julian almost laughed at the absurdity. "I'm planning to defend your position so aggressively that Vanessa Hartwick will regret ever calling that meeting." "Don't." Lily's hand shot out, stopping him with unexpected intensity. "Don't defend me like I'm a victim who needs protecting. Defend the position itself, the business case, the accessibility mandate, the revenue opportunity. Make them see that this isn't charity or sentiment. It's strategy." Her eyes flashed with something fierce. "I won't be anyone's charity case, Julian, not even yours." The words landed with the force of a challenge, and Julian realized she was right. Defending Lily personally would only reinforce the narrative that this was about guilt or attraction, or any of the other ugly insinuations Clarissa's article had planted. But defending the business logic, the strategic value, the market opportunity, that was a fight he could win. "All right," he said slowly, "then come to the meeting. Present your audit and your plan. Show them exactly what they're questioning." Lily's expression flickered with surprise, then calculation. "You want me to face the board directly? I want them to understand what they're actually dealing with." Julian pulled out his phone, already texting Marcus to add Lily to the meeting agenda. "Can you be ready by 3? "I've been ready since you offered me this job," Lily said. "The question is whether your board is ready for me." The Hawthorne & Co. boardroom occupied the top floor of the corporate headquarters. a space designed to intimidate with its sweeping views of Central Park and furniture that cost more than most people's cars. 12 board members sat around the mahogany table, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. Vanessa Hartwick held court at the far end, dressed in Valentino and radiating vindicated righteousness. Julian took his seat at the head of the table, Lily beside him with a leather portfolio that looked almost comically oversized against her slim frame. She'd dressed carefully. A navy suit that was professional without being expensive, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back severely. The effect was someone trying to look older, more established, more worthy of being taken seriously. It broke Julian's heart a little. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Julian began, his voice carrying the particular authority that came from owning 60% of the company. "I'm sure you've all seen this morning's article in Manhattan Social Review. Rather than address it through PR statements, I thought we should discuss it directly." "Discuss?" Vanessa Hartwick's voice cut through the room like expensive crystal shattering. "Julian, there's nothing to discuss. You created a 6-figure executive position for a hostess you'd known for less than 24 hours. The article doesn't even begin to capture how spectacularly inappropriate that decision was." Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. Marcus, seated near the windows, looked like he wanted to disappear into the Manhattan skyline. "Mrs. Hartwick," Lily said quietly, and the room went silent with surprise that she dared to speak. "With respect, you're incorrect. Mr. Hawthorne didn't create this position for me. He created it because Hawthorne & Co. has been hemorrhaging potential revenue by failing to accommodate 15% of the American population." She opened her portfolio, distributing bound presentations around the table with steady hands. "What you're holding is a comprehensive accessibility audit of all 15 Hawthorne restaurant locations, completed over the past week." Julian watched the board members flip through the presentation, seeing their expressions shift from dismissive to interested despite themselves. Lily had been thorough, photographs documenting accessibility failures, customer complaint data going back 5 years, competitor analyses showing how restaurants with robust accessibility programs captured higher market share, demographic research projecting growth in the deaf and hard of hearing community. "Page 12, Lily continued, moving to stand at the presentation screen with a confidence that seemed to surprise even her. "This shows revenue data from our 3 largest competitors who've implemented comprehensive ASL training. On average, they've seen a 23% increase in family dining reservations and a 37% increase in repeat customers from the deaf and hard of hearing community." She clicked to the next slide. Page 15 projects what those numbers would mean for Hawthorne & Co., conservatively estimating an additional $4.2 million in annual revenue across all locations. Vanessa's expression had gone from triumphant to uncertain. "These are just projections, based on documented data from comparable establishments." Lily interrupted, her voice still quiet but carrying a steel edge. "Page 23 contains testimonials from deaf customers explaining why they avoid Hawthorne restaurants, despite our reputation for excellence. Page 29 outlines a phased implementation plan for ASL training, including cost analysis and ROI projections. Page 35 details partnerships I've already established with 3 major deaf advocacy organizations who are willing to promote Hawthorne locations once our accessibility standards meet their certification requirements." The room was silent except for the rustle of pages turning. Julian felt a surge of something that might have been pride or vindication or simply relief that his instincts hadn't failed him. Lily wasn't just competent, she was exceptional. "The question before this board," Lily continued, meeting Vanessa Hartwick's gaze directly, "isn't whether I'm qualified for this position. The question is whether Hawthorne & Co. is willing to continue ignoring a multi-million-dollar market segment out of institutional inertia." She paused. "My salary is $120,000 annually. If I fail to generate at least triple that in new revenue within 18 months, I'll resign. If I succeed, perhaps we can discuss whether emotional decisions are truly overriding sound business judgment." Vanessa's face had gone an interesting shade of red. "You can't possibly guarantee—" "No, I can't guarantee anything," Lily agreed, "but neither could anyone else you might hire for this position. Except I'm willing to bet my job security on it. How many candidates can say the same?" Board member James Morrison, a restaurant industry veteran who'd been friends with Julian's father, leaned forward with undisguised interest. "Ms. Patterson, this is impressive work for 1 week. Who helped you compile this data?" "No one," Lily said simply. "I have a 6-year-old sister to care for, so I'm used to working while other people sleep." She glanced at Julian. Mr. Hawthorne provided access to company files and competitor data. The analysis is mine. Morrison looked at Julian with an expression that suggested he was reassessing everything he'd assumed about this situation. Julian, why didn't you lead with this information when you announced the hire? Because I shouldn't have to justify every employment decision to a board that's supposed to trust my judgment, Julian said, his voice harder than intended. My father hired people based on potential and character, not just credentials. He built this company on the belief that talent exists everywhere, not just in Ivy League business programs. He looked around the table, meeting each board member's gaze. Lily Patterson has more practical understanding of accessibility than anyone we could have recruited through traditional channels. She's also willing to work harder than anyone I've ever met, because she understands what it means to fight for space in a world that doesn't automatically make room for you. That's very noble, Vanessa said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. But it doesn't change the fact that this looks improper. A wealthy man hiring a beautiful young woman who was conveniently desperate. Finish that sentence, Mrs. Hartwick, and I'll have hotel security escort you out of this building. Julian's voice could have frozen nitrogen. What looks improper is a board member using her position to settle personal grievances by planting anonymous quotes in gossip columns. Vanessa went pale. I have no idea what You were at the restaurant the night I hired Lily. You saw her dining with my mother and made your disapproval clear. 3 days later, a hit piece appears quoting an anonymous source who happens to use almost the exact same phrasing you did that night. Julian stood, his full height and barely controlled fury filling the space. I may have been willing to overlook that as petty vindictiveness, but you made the mistake of attacking an employee who's done nothing except try to do her job excellently. The room had gone deadly quiet. Morrison was watching the confrontation with the focused attention of someone witnessing a power shift in real time. I move that we accept Miss Patterson's proposal, Morrison said into the silence. 18 months to demonstrate measurable ROI. If she succeeds, we formally recognize accessibility as a permanent strategic priority. If she doesn't, we revisit the position. He looked at Vanessa. All in favor? 8 hands went up immediately. After a long moment, 3 more followed. Vanessa's remained pointedly lowered, along with one other board member who'd clearly chosen alliance over conviction. Motion carries, Morrison said. Welcome to the team, Miss Patterson. I look forward to seeing what you accomplish. Lily nodded, her face carefully neutral, though Julian could see the fine tremor in her hands as she closed her portfolio. Thank you. I won't disappoint you. As the board members filed out, Morrison paused beside Julian. Your father would have been proud, he said quietly. Not because you hired her, though that took courage, but because you trusted your instincts even when it was easier not to. He glanced toward Lily, who was gathering her materials with focused intensity. She's the real deal, Julian. Don't let the Vanessa Hartwicks of the world convince you otherwise. When the room finally emptied, leaving only Julian and Lily, the silence felt heavy with everything unsaid. Lily stood by the windows, staring out at Central Park, with an expression Julian couldn't quite read. You didn't have to defend me like that, she said finally. I had the presentation. The presentation was brilliant, Julian interrupted. But it wouldn't have mattered if Vanessa had been allowed to poison the room with insinuations about impropriety. Sometimes you need data, and sometimes you need someone willing to burn bridges on your behalf. Lily turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears or fury or both. You just made an enemy of one of the most powerful women in New York society, for me. Why? Julian considered the question, looking for the right words to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. Because you were right. This isn't charity, it's strategy, and I'm tired of people who've never struggled for anything telling me what honor and legacy mean. Your father would be proud, Lily said, echoing Morrison's words. Then, more quietly, thank you. Don't thank me yet, Julian said. You just promised to triple your salary and revenue within 18 months. That's a hell of a bet. Lily's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Some bets are worth taking. Someone wise told me that recently. As they left the boardroom together, Julian's phone buzzed with a text from Dorothy. I heard about the meeting. Well done. Bring Lily and Grace for dinner this weekend. We need to celebrate, and I promised Grace we'd discuss goldfish. Julian showed the text to Lily, who let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Your mother is relentless. It's her best quality, Julian agreed. But as they stepped into the elevator, Julian couldn't shake the feeling that winning today's battle had only guaranteed tomorrow's war. Vanessa Hartwick wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully, and Manhattan's social elite had long memories for perceived slights. The question wasn't whether there would be consequences. The question was whether they'd be ready when those consequences arrived. 6 months passed like a storm surge, relentless, transformative, and impossible to ignore. By April, Lily had trained over 200 staff members across all 15 Hawthorne locations in basic ASL. By May, 3 restaurants had received accessibility certification from the National Association of the Deaf. By June, reservation requests from deaf and hard-of-hearing customers had increased by 41%. The numbers were undeniable. The backlash was equally so. Julian stood in the kitchen of Hawthorne & Co., his newest location in Brooklyn, the one Lily had specifically requested they open in her old neighborhood, watching his executive chef, Thomas Beaumont, slam a sauté pan onto the burner with enough force to make the line cooks flinch. "I don't care what the diversity metrics say," Thomas snarled, his French accent thickening with anger. "Half my kitchen staff is struggling with this sign language requirement, and it's affecting service speed. We're a Michelin-starred establishment, not a charity program." "It's not a charity program," Julian said, his patience wearing thin from having the same conversation for the 6th time in as many months. "It's an accessibility initiative that's generating revenue increases across every location that's implemented it. Revenue that comes at the cost of operational excellence." Thomas gestured toward the dining room, where the dinner service was in full swing. "Last week, one of my sous chefs spent 15 minutes trying to communicate a menu modification to a deaf customer instead of focusing on the other 30 orders waiting. That's not efficiency. That's distraction. That's customer service," Julian countered, and the customer in question posted a 5-star review online specifically praising the interaction. "We've had 17 reservation requests since then from people who saw that review." Thomas's expression suggested he found this argument unpersuasive. "Mr. Hawthorne, with respect, your father built this empire on culinary excellence, not social engineering. If you continue down this path, you're going to alienate the very clientele that made Hawthorne & Co. what it is." The threat was barely veiled, and Julian felt his jaw tighten. Thomas Beaumont was one of the most respected chefs in New York, poached from a 3 Michelin-star restaurant in Paris at considerable expense. Losing him would be a blow to their reputation, but keeping him at the cost of the accessibility program would be a betrayal of everything Julian had fought for over the past 6 months. "Then perhaps," Julian said quietly, "you need to decide whether culinary excellence and accessibility are really incompatible, or whether you're just uncomfortable with change." Thomas's face went red. "I see. So now we're questioning my commitment. Thomas, take a walk." The voice came from the kitchen doorway, where Lily stood with Grace beside her, both dressed for the staff dinner Julian had organized to celebrate the Brooklyn location's opening. Lily's expression was calm, but her eyes held a steel edge Julian had learned to recognize. "You're about to say something that will make this conversation impossible to recover from, and I don't think that's what you actually want." The executive chef stared at her with undisguised resentment. "Miss Patterson, perhaps you should let the adults handle." "I'm 24, not 12, Lily interrupted. "And unlike you, I've actually read the kitchen efficiency reports from our certified locations. Service speed is up 3% on average because staff are communicating more clearly across language barriers, including ASL, Spanish, and the various regional dialects our line cooks bring from their home countries." She pulled out her phone, pulling up a spreadsheet. "Your kitchen specifically has seen a 2% decrease in remade dishes due to miscommunication. That's saving approximately $1,400 weekly in food costs alone." Thomas opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly thrown by having data wielded against his emotional objections. "But let's address your real concern," Lily continued, her voice softening slightly. "You're worried that accommodating deaf customers will compromise the dining experience for hearing customers. You're worried that Hawthorne & Co. will become known as that accessible restaurant instead of that exceptional restaurant." She paused. "What if I told you those things aren't mutually exclusive? They are when my staff is spread thin trying to accommodate everyone's special needs," Thomas muttered, though some of the heat had left his voice. "Then hire more staff," Lily said simply. "The revenue increases from the accessibility program more than cover the cost of additional front-of-house personnel. I've already run the numbers and submitted a proposal to Julian." She glanced at Julian. "Though I was planning to discuss it at tonight's dinner, rather than in the middle of a kitchen confrontation." Despite everything, Julian felt a smile tug at his lips. "Noted. We'll discuss it tonight. Grace tugged on Lily's sleeve, signing something that made Lily's expression soften. She signed back, then translated for the room. Grace wants to know if the chocolate souffle is ready yet, because she was promised chocolate souffle, and she's very serious about dessert. Thomas's rigid expression cracked slightly. Over the past 6 months, Grace had become something of a mascot at Hawthorne headquarters. Her enthusiasm for food and complete lack of interest in adult drama, making her universally beloved by staff who might otherwise resent the accessibility program. The executive chef had taught her to make profiteroles last month, communicating entirely through gestures and enthusiasm. "The souffle is ready," Thomas said gruffly, then signed something that made Grace's face light up with delight. The sign was clumsy, unpracticed but unmistakable. "Chocolate for you." Lily's eyes widened with surprise, and Julian felt something warm unfurl in his chest. Thomas Beaumont, the man who'd just been ranting about accessibility requirements, had learned enough ASL to promise a 6-year-old girl her dessert. "Thank you, Chef," Lily said quietly. "That means more than you probably realize." Thomas cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable. Yes, well, the child has impeccable taste. It seemed appropriate to communicate with a fellow food enthusiast. He turned to Julian. "We'll discuss the staffing proposal tonight, but I maintain my concerns about operational standards." "Duly noted," Julian said. "Now, can we please get through one staff dinner without a philosophical crisis?" The staff dinner was held on the restaurant's covered rooftop, strung with lights that turned the Brooklyn skyline into a backdrop worthy of a film set. 60 employees from across all Hawthorne locations mingled over small plates and wine. The atmosphere relaxed in the way that only happened when the boss was present but clearly not looking for problems. Julian found himself standing near the edge of the rooftop, watching Lily navigate the crowd with Grace in tow. Over 6 months, he'd watched her transform from the exhausted young woman in a school library to someone who moved through these spaces with earned confidence. She'd cut her hair shorter, invested in a professional wardrobe that fit properly, lost the defensive hunch that had characterized her early weeks. But the core of who she was remained unchanged. That fierce protectiveness of her sister, that refusal to accept unnecessary barriers, that ability to make people feel seen. "You're staring." Dorothy appeared at his elbow, signing as she spoke, a habit she'd developed to practice her own fluency. "It's becoming obvious." "I'm observing," Julian corrected, signing back with the improved but still imperfect grammar that marked him as an enthusiastic student rather than a native signer. "There's a difference." Dorothy's expression suggested she found this distinction unconvincing. "James Morrison asked me last week if there was something developing between you and Miss Patterson. I told him you were both too professional and too stubborn to acknowledge attraction even if it existed." Julian felt his neck heat. "There's nothing to acknowledge. Lily works for me. That creates a power dynamic that makes any kind of personal relationship inappropriate." "Your father was my boss when we started dating," Dorothy pointed out. "He owned the restaurant where I worked as a hostess. Sound familiar?" "That was different." "It was exactly the same." Dorothy's hands moved with emphatic precision. "The only difference is that we didn't have an entire board of directors scrutinizing our every interaction, looking for scandal." She paused, her expression softening. "But we did have people like Vanessa Hartwick, who suggested your father was taking advantage of a poor deaf girl who didn't know better. We survived their judgment. So will you if you decide it's worth it." Before Julian could respond, Marcus appeared with an expression that immediately set off alarm bells. "We have a problem. Vanessa Hartwick just posted something on social media. It's going viral." Julian pulled out his phone, his stomach sinking as he read the post. "Attending a charity gala for children's literacy tonight. Struck by the contrast between real philanthropy and performative activism. Some people hire the disadvantaged to make themselves look generous. Others actually help communities without demanding public praise. Real charity? Performative virtue? New York elite." The post included a photograph from tonight's staff dinner, clearly taken by someone on the rooftop, though Julian couldn't immediately identify who. The image showed Julian and Lily in conversation, their body language intimate despite the professional distance they'd carefully maintained. Grace was visible in the background, her disability obvious from the hearing aids she wore. The caption continued, "When accessibility initiatives look suspiciously like personal projects, ask yourself, who really benefits?" "She's implying you're exploiting Grace's disability for publicity," Marcus said unnecessarily. "The comments are already brutal. People are calling you everything from a narcissist to, well, worse." Julian read through the comments, each one more vicious than the last. Anonymous accounts suggesting he'd staged the entire accessibility program as a tax write-off. Think pieces wondering if Lily was really qualified or just convenient. Speculation about his relationship with Lily that ranged from patronizing to obscene. And underneath it all, a thread of genuine concern from people who'd been following the Hawthorne accessibility program with interest, now questioning whether they'd been naive to believe in its authenticity. "We need to respond," Marcus said. "PR can draft something." "No." Julian's voice came out harder than intended. "We're not responding to Vanessa Hartwick's bait. She wants a public fight because that keeps the story alive." He looked at Marcus. "But I want to know who took that photograph. Someone on our staff sent that image to Vanessa, which means we have a leak." Marcus's expression darkened. "I'll start an investigation." Quietly, Julian emphasized. "The last thing we need is a witch hunt. Just find out who and handle it discreetly." Across the rooftop, Lily had noticed the shift in energy, the way conversations were dying as people checked their phones. Julian watched her pull out her own device, watched her face go carefully blank as she read Vanessa's post. She signed something to Grace, who nodded and went to join Dorothy near the dessert table. Then Lily walked directly toward Julian with the purposeful stride of someone who'd made a decision. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "Privately." They found privacy in the restaurant's wine cellar, a climate-controlled space lined with bottles worth more than most people's cars. Lily leaned against a rack of Bordeaux, her arms crossed in that protective gesture Julian had learned meant she was preparing to fight. "I'm resigning," she said flatly, effective immediately. The words hit Julian like a physical blow. "No, it's not a request, Julian. I'm telling you I'm done." Her voice remained steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "I've spent 6 months proving that I can do this job. I've generated revenue increases, implemented training programs, earned certifications. None of it matters. They're still going to question my legitimacy, my motives, your judgment. And now they're using Grace, using a 6-year-old child, to suggest I'm some kind of opportunist exploiting her disability for career advancement. So let them," Julian said, hearing the desperation in his own voice. "Lily, you've accomplished more in 6 months than most executives do in years. The accessibility program is working. The numbers prove it. Don't let Vanessa Hartwick win by doing exactly what she wants, driving you out. This isn't about winning or losing." Lily's eyes were bright with suppressed emotion. "This is about Grace. Do you understand what it's like for her to see her sister's face on social media with people calling me names? To have her friends' parents asking questions about why we're suddenly famous?" Her voice cracked slightly. "I took this job because I thought I could make a difference. But I won't sacrifice my sister's peace of mind to prove a point to people who've already decided I don't belong." Julian moved closer, careful not to crowd her, but close enough that she couldn't avoid his gaze. "What if we go public? Tell the real story. Your story. No PR spin, no corporate messaging. Just the truth about why you learned ASL, what the accessibility program actually means, how you've built this from nothing." "That's exactly what Vanessa wants," Lily said. "A public narrative war where she can keep questioning my credibility and digging into my past." "Then let her dig," Julian interrupted. "Lily, you have nothing to hide. You're a 24-year-old woman who raised her sister while working multiple jobs and taught herself a language to ensure that child never felt alone. That's not exploitation. That's heroism. And if we tell that story loudly enough, Vanessa's insinuations will look exactly like what they are. Bitter jealousy from someone who's never had to fight for anything." Lily stared at him for a long moment, her expression warring between hope and exhaustion. "You really think it would work?" "I think," Julian said carefully, "that the truth is always worth fighting for. And I think you're too important, not just to this company, but to the people you're helping, to walk away because some bitter socialite is having a tantrum." "She's not just some socialite," Lily pointed out. "She has influence, connections, the ability to make our lives miserable. Let her try." Julian felt something fierce and protective surge in his chest. "I've spent 6 months watching you work miracles with no resources, no support system, nothing but determination and talent. Vanessa Hartwick has never created anything in her life. She just tears down what other people build. I refuse to let her destroy this." "This," Lily repeated quietly. "You mean the accessibility program?" Julian held her gaze, aware that they were standing too close, that the wine cellar felt too intimate, that the line between professional and personal had become dangerously blurred. "I mean everything you've built. Everything you represent, everything you've proven is possible when someone gets a real chance. The air between them felt charged, heavy with things neither could say. Then Grace's voice echoed down the stairs, not speaking, but making the particular sound she used when she wanted attention. And the moment shattered. Lily stepped back, clearing her throat. I should get Grace home. It's past her bedtime. Will you think about staying? Julian asked. About fighting instead of running? Lily's expression was unreadable. I'll think about it, but Julian, if I stay, if I fight, things are going to get ugly. Vanessa isn't going to stop, and neither will the people who agree with her. Are you sure this battle is worth it? Julian thought about his father, about the empire built on the principle that luxury should be accessible to everyone. He thought about Dorothy's isolation before Lily arrived. He thought about Grace's smile when Thomas had signed "chocolate for you" in clumsy but sincere ASL. Yes, he said. I'm sure. Lily nodded slowly, then turned toward the stairs. At the doorway, she paused. Your father would be proud of you. Not because you hired me, though that took courage, but because you're willing to fight for something that matters, even when it costs you. She left before Julian could respond, her footsteps echoing on the stairs, and he stood alone in the wine cellar surrounded by bottles worth fortunes, but unable to buy the one thing he was starting to realize he wanted most. The question wasn't whether Lily would stay. The question was what he'd be willing to sacrifice to make sure she could. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Wednesday, giving the New York media exactly enough time to clear their morning schedules, but not enough time to manufacture extensive pre-coverage. Julian stood in the green room of the Hawthorne Towers Media Center, adjusting his tie for the third time while Marcus ran through the final logistics. NBC, CNN, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and about 40 smaller outlets, Marcus recited from his tablet, plus every social media influencer in Manhattan who could beg credentials. It's the biggest press event we've done since your father's funeral. Julian's stomach tightened at the comparison. His father had built this empire through quiet excellence, not public spectacle, but Richard Hawthorne had never faced an opponent like Vanessa Hartwick, who'd spent the past week turning his son's life into tabloid fodder. The door opened, and Lily entered wearing a navy dress that was professional without being pretentious, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look both younger and more serious. Grace followed behind her, holding Dorothy's hand, wearing a yellow dress with sunflowers that Dorothy had bought specifically for today. The little girl looked nervous but determined, her hearing aids visible and unconcealable, exactly as they'd planned. Are you sure about this? Julian asked Lily for perhaps the 20th time since she'd agreed to his plan. Once we do this, there's no taking it back. Your privacy, Grace's privacy, it all becomes public record. Our privacy was already violated the moment Vanessa posted that photograph, Lily said, her voice steady despite the tension Julian could see in her shoulders. The only question is whether we control the narrative or let her control it for us. She glanced at Grace, who was signing something to Dorothy about the television cameras. Besides, Grace wants to do this. She says if people are going to talk about her anyway, she wants them to know the truth. Julian knelt down to Grace's level, signing slowly, carefully. Are you scared? Grace considered the question with the seriousness she brought to everything, then signed back with the blunt honesty of a 6-year-old. A little, but Lily says scared is okay if you do the thing anyway. Your sister is very wise. Julian signed, and Grace's smile was worth every risk they were about to take. Dorothy's hands moved, and Lily translated softly. She says your father always believed that the truth told plainly was more powerful than any lie told elaborately. She says today you honor that principle. 5 minutes, Mr. Hawthorne, Marcus called from the doorway. Julian stood, meeting Lily's eyes. Last chance to change your mind. I changed my mind the night you found me in that library, Lily said. I decided to stop running from judgment and start creating the world I want Grace to inherit. Today's just the next step. They walked together into the media center, where 200 people packed a space designed for half that number. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters filled every seat, their phones already recording despite the event not officially starting. Julian felt the weight of every eye, every judgment, every assumption about what this press conference would reveal. He took his place at the podium, Lily standing to his right, Grace and Dorothy slightly behind them in a configuration that Julian's PR team had choreographed for maximum visual impact. Family, chosen, and blood, united in purpose. Thank you for coming, Julian began, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who'd given hundreds of presentations, but never one that mattered quite this much. 2 weeks ago, questions were raised publicly about Hawthorne and Coverdurn's accessibility initiative and the hiring practices that led to its creation. Today I'm going to answer those questions directly, completely, and without the corporate spin that usually characterizes these events. He clicked to the first slide, a photograph of his mother sitting alone at table 7, the image Marcus had pulled from security footage on the night everything changed. This is my mother, Dorothy Hawthorne, 8 months after my father's death. She's sitting alone in the restaurant my father built specifically to ensure she would always feel welcome, always feel understood. But after he died, she stopped coming. Because despite working in these spaces for years, I had failed to learn enough ASL to communicate with her comfortably. Because our staff, excellent as they were in every other regard, couldn't bridge the gap between her silence and their service. Because we had built luxury dining establishments that excluded 15% of the American population through thoughtless design and institutional apathy. The room was silent, cameras clicking as reporters captured every word. Julian clicked to the next slide, the now famous image of Lily signing with Dorothy, both women laughing. This is Lily Patterson on her first night working at Hawthorne & Co. She saw my mother preparing to leave, saw the isolation I'd failed to notice, and did something I should have done years ago. She created connection where there was only distance. He paused, meeting the eyes of reporters in the front row. Some of you have suggested that hiring Miss Patterson was inappropriate favoritism, that creating the Director of Accessibility position was charity disguised as employment, that I exploited her vulnerability for positive publicity. Today, I'm going to show you exactly why those characterizations are not just wrong, but offensively ignorant. He clicked through slides showing the revenue data, the certification achievements, the customer satisfaction metrics, the operational efficiency improvements, every number documented, every claim sourced, every achievement verified by third-party audits. In 6 months, Lily Patterson has generated $4.7 million in new revenue across Hawthorne locations. She's trained 234 staff members in ASL. She's secured accessibility certifications for 8 restaurants, with 7 more pending. She's established partnerships with 12 disability advocacy organizations. And she's done all of this while raising her 6-year-old deaf sister alone, with no family support and no safety net beyond her own determination. Julian clicked to a new slide. Photographs of Lily working, teaching, implementing, achieving. Images that told a story of competence earned through relentless effort. Miss Patterson is not my charity case. She's not my PR project. She's the most qualified person for this position in the entire country, because she understands what accessibility means at a level that no Ivy League MBA could teach. She learned ASL to communicate with her sister after their parents died, because she believed, correctly, that Grace deserved to grow up with at least one person who could talk to her without barriers. He paused, his voice hardening. If you think that's exploitation, then you don't understand what those words mean. Movement in the back. Vanessa Hartwick had arrived, fashionably late and strategically positioned where cameras would catch her reaction. Julian met her gaze directly. Mrs. Vanessa Hartwick has been the primary source of questions about Miss Patterson's qualifications and my judgment in hiring her. She suggested publicly that this accessibility program is performative activism, that I'm using my position to benefit someone I'm personally involved with, that I'm betraying my father's legacy through emotional, rather than strategic decision-making. Julian's voice could have cut glass. I'm going to address those claims individually, because they deserve to be destroyed individually. The room's energy shifted, reporters leaning forward with the scent of real conflict in the air. First, performative activism. Mrs. Hartwick sits on the board of 3 charitable organizations. According to public tax filings, those organizations have collective annual budgets of $17 million. According to those same filings, Mrs. Hartwick has donated approximately $40,000 to those charities over the past 5 years, less than 0.3% of the money she's helped raise from others. The Hawthorne Accessibility Program has an annual budget of $1.2 million, paid entirely by our company, with measurable outcomes that benefit thousands of deaf and hard-of-hearing customers. I'll let you decide which approach is more performative. Vanessa's face had gone pale, then red. Julian didn't pause. Second, personal involvement. Mrs. Hartwick has insinuated that my relationship with Miss Patterson is inappropriate, that I hired her based on attraction rather than merit. For the record, Miss Patterson and I have maintained a completely professional relationship. We have never socialized outside of work events. We have never communicated outside of business hours except regarding company matters. If anyone has documented evidence to the contrary, I invite them to present it now." The silence was absolute. Julian let it stretch, daring Vanessa or anyone else to challenge him with fabricated claims. "But let's examine Mrs. Hartwick's own history," Julian continued, his voice quiet but carrying perfectly in the hushed room. In 2019, Senator Gregory Hartwick hired a 23-year-old campaign aide named Jennifer Morrison. Miss Morrison had no political experience beyond student government, but she was hired as Senior Communications Director at a salary of $95,000. 6 months later, she became the senator's personal assistant with a salary increase to $130,000. 2 years after that, Senator Hartwick left his first wife and married Miss Morrison, who is now Mrs. Hartwick's predecessor. He paused. "I don't judge the senator's personal choices, but I do find Mrs. Hartwick's sudden concern about qualified young women being hired by wealthy older men to be somewhat hypocritical." The room erupted. Reporters shouting questions, cameras swiveling between Julian and Vanessa, social media exploding in real time. Vanessa stood frozen, her expression caught between fury and humiliation, before she turned and pushed toward the exit. Julian raised his voice over the chaos. "Finally, my father's legacy. Richard Hawthorne built this company on 2 principles: culinary excellence and radical accessibility. He married a deaf woman when people told him it would be bad for business. He hired immigrants when others wouldn't. He promoted talent regardless of credentials, background, or social standing. Every decision I've made regarding the accessibility program honors those principles. If Mrs. Hartwick or anyone else believes otherwise, they're welcome to their opinion, but they're objectively wrong." He clicked to the final slide, a photograph of Richard and Dorothy Hawthorne on their wedding day, young and laughing, surrounded by people from every walk of life. "My father used to say that luxury without inclusivity is just expensive elitism. That excellence means nothing if it only serves the few. That the measure of a company isn't its profit margin, but its positive impact on the world." Julian's voice softened. "I miss him every day. I miss his wisdom, his humor, his absolute certainty that doing the right thing and running a successful business weren't mutually exclusive. But I know what he'd say about this situation. He'd say that defending someone's right to succeed on merit, regardless of their background, is always worth fighting for." He stepped back from the podium. "Miss Patterson has agreed to answer questions. I ask that you show her the same respect you'd show any other executive, because that's exactly what she is." Lily moved to the microphone, Grace stepping forward to stand beside her in a gesture that was both brave and calculated. Julian watched the reporters' faces soften as they saw the little girl in the yellow dress, her hearing aids catching the studio lights, her hand gripping her sister's with absolute trust. "I'm Lily Patterson," she said simply. "I'm 24 years old. I learned ASL from YouTube videos and free online courses because I couldn't afford formal classes. I didn't finish college because someone had to raise my sister when our parents died in a car accident 3 years ago. I was homeless for 2 days before Mr. Hawthorne found me in a library and offered me this position." She paused, her voice steady. "I'm not going to apologize for any of that. I'm not going to pretend I come from privilege or had advantages I didn't earn. But I am going to tell you that I work harder than anyone in this room. I care more about this program than any credential could demonstrate, and I've proven my value through measurable results that speak louder than any doubt about my qualifications." A reporter from the Times raised her hand. "Miss Patterson, how do you respond to critics who say you're being used as a political prop?" "I'd say that anyone who thinks I could be used for anything doesn't know me very well," Lily answered, a hint of steel in her voice. "I make my own choices. I agreed to this press conference because I'm tired of letting other people define my story. Grace and I deserve better than whispers and insinuations. So do the thousands of deaf and hard-of-hearing people who finally have restaurants where they feel welcome." Grace tugged Lily's sleeve, signing something. Lily smiled, translating. "My sister wants to know if we can leave soon because she's hungry, and she thinks adults talk too much about boring things." Laughter rippled through the room, genuine and warm. Julian watched the reporters' expressions shift further, the narrative recalibrating in real time from scandalous hiring practice to young woman overcoming adversity. It was manipulative, calculated, and absolutely necessary. The questions continued for 20 more minutes, some hostile, most curious, a few genuinely supportive. Lily handled each with the competence Julian had known she possessed, never defensive, but never apologetic. When they finally ended the conference, stepping out of the media center into a private corridor, she was trembling. "Did I do okay?" she asked, her confident mask cracking to reveal the exhausted young woman underneath. "You were perfect," Julian said, and meant it completely. Dorothy signed something and Lily translated automatically. "She says the hard part isn't the performance, it's waiting to see if people believe you." "They'll believe," Marcus said, appearing with his tablet already showing social media metrics. "You're trending on 3 platforms. The general sentiment is overwhelmingly positive. Several major influencers are calling Vanessa Hartwick out for hypocrisy. The Times is already drafting a feature on accessibility in fine dining." He looked at Julian. "You might have just turned this whole situation around." "We," Julian corrected. "We turned it around. None of this works without Lily's courage." Grace signed something to Dorothy, who laughed and signed back. Lily smiled, watching them communicate with the ease of family. "Grace says she's proud of herself for being brave and now she wants ice cream as a reward. Dorothy says that seems reasonable." "Ice cream it is," Julian agreed. "There's a place 2 blocks from here that makes—" His phone buzzed. Then Marcus's, then Lily's. They all looked down simultaneously, and Julian felt his chest tighten as he read the message from James Morrison. "Emergency board meeting tonight. Vanessa is demanding your resignation as CEO. She claims you've created a hostile work environment and violated corporate governance standards. We need to talk before this gets worse. Call me immediately." The victory they'd just achieved suddenly felt hollow. Julian looked at Lily, seeing his own realization reflected in her eyes. They'd won the public narrative war, but the private battle was just beginning.